We'll see if we can get through a recording this morning. The last couple of Sundays, the phone has played out in the middle of the sermon, so we'll see if we can get through that this morning. Good morning. We are glad you're here. Thank you, Joseph, for running the board for us this morning and getting that up there. We're continuing our Core 52 examination. Today's topic is faith. I want to thank everybody who showed up for the Valentine's dinner last night. I was not one. Y'all are probably grateful because what food was left over would have gone home with me, or I would have eaten it all last night. We'd have been searching for more food. We do have another fellowship next Sunday, and then on the 13th of March, we have another brown bag. So if we don't watch it, I'm going to have to start buying new jackets right here because they're going to pop out of this one. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Tony Evans and Dr. Rick Ezell. These two men this week have influenced me on this morning's topic, this morning's sermon. And the battle raged through the night as to which sermon outline I would proceed with. And so we're going to go with Dr. Rick Ezell this morning. If you know anything about Dr. Tony Evans, he is an animated preacher. I come nowhere close to that. Could not even begin to scrape the shoes that he delivered a message. But it was a great message of faith, being the concept of faith. But we're going to look at faith this morning. We're going to continue our discussion on Wednesday night on Zoom. Mike and Jan have been doing a fantastic job with that for the better part of the last year. We'll continue this topic of faith on Wednesday night, and we're grateful to them and what they bring to this class. Anybody recognize this guy? Anybody ever used to watch Meet the Press? This guy's name is Tim Russert. He hosted Meet the Press until his death of a heart attack a few years ago. If you ever got to watch the show, he could be combative, but he would always bring, he was throwing gasoline on everybody's fire on both sides. He was not biased as to whose gas he would pour fire on, or whose fire he would pour gas on. He said to John Meacham, when he invited him to appear on Meet the Press to debate a noted atheist, Christopher Hitchens, he says, "It's about the faith, brother. It's about the faith." Meacham was an Episcopalian preacher. Russert was a devout Catholic, of which he made no apologies for, did not try to hide it. And he invited Christopher Hitchens, how do I put this? An atheist. A devout atheist, if there can be such a thing. Russert threw gas on both the fires. And when Meacham started to hem and haw about not coming, Russert said to him, "It's about the faith, brother. It's about the faith." And on the day that Russert died, Howard Feynman of Newsweek magazine made this observation during a television interview. He said, "Tim Russert did not pursue false gods. He pursued the real one." That's quite a compliment. To be said about somebody in the media anyway, but to be said about anybody, it's quite a compliment. That they pursued the real God. When Meacham wrote about Russert's invitation, saying it's the faith, brother, he drew this conclusion. In that brief chat, the many sides of Russert were on display. He was charming. He played it straight. He was pushing others to be braver and bolder, all in the service of creating an interesting conversation about the things that matter most. Creative conversation about the things that matter most. Tim Russert was 100% right. It's about the faith. It's the faith. It's what we believe about the things that matter most. You take faith away, we have nothing left. The writer of Hebrews 11, if you want to turn in your Bibles there, that's where our text is going to be from this morning, I think would surely agree with that. If what we believe makes any difference, then it has to change the way we live. That's what the phrase "by faith," repeated over and over again in this chapter, is all about. If what we believe makes any difference, then it will change our lives. It's all about pursuing the one true God. The thing is, do we take faith as seriously as we ought to? In 1864, our country put "In God We Trust" on a penny. 1864. 1954, Dwight Eisenhower said, let's put it on all of our currency. In 1954, we also added these words to the Pledge of Allegiance: under God. One nation under God. But are we a nation under God? Do we trust God? You know, we're not a very trusting people. We certainly don't trust our government officials, regardless of which side of the aisle you fall on. We don't trust our bosses. We don't trust our neighbors. We don't trust our doctors. Some of us don't even trust our pastors. No offense taken. But the problem I have is that sometimes we don't even trust God. George Carlin, the comedian, for him, religion and God weren't real high on his list. He said the following about God. He said, something is wrong here. War, disease, death, destruction, hunger, filth, poverty, torture, crime, corruption, and the ice capades. Something is definitely wrong. This is not good work. If this is the best that God can do, I'm not impressed. Results like these do not belong on the resume of a supreme being. This is the kind of, and fill in a blank there, you'd expect from an office temp with a bad attitude. Well, the truth of the matter is that God's not responsible for many of these things. Fallen man is. But a lot of people feel that way. A lot of people think that way. And they blame God for all the bad things that are going on in the world. And I often wonder what it would be like if I had not grown up in a Christian household. I grew up with Christian parents. I grew up with Christian grandparents. The church was just a half a mile from my house that I attended. I wonder if I had not had that kind of influence growing up, would I be a Christian today? I wonder if you would. I think we take faith for granted. I know I'm certain that I do. We think it's easy to believe and easy to keep believing. But it's not. Not for some of us. Maybe not for most of us. I'm sure there are some people to whom God has given such grace that believing is never a challenge. That their faith is never challenged. Even in the midst of extreme circumstances. But the rest of us struggle to believe, at least even part of the time. Robert Rayburn says it this: think of what we must believe to become a Christian. That there is a God. We lost about half the population right there. That you are God's creature. That you have rebelled. That He, God, is holy. And you are guilty. You are guilty as a sinner before Him. And we need to believe, or we must believe to be a Christian, that He sent Jesus Christ into the world to atone for that sin. And that by believing in Jesus, His righteousness and His virtue, and His death, those things are imputed on you, so that your guilt is swept away, and you are accounted as righteous in God's sight. That if you believe in Jesus, you've been made a new creature in Christ. You've been given a summons to live a new life and the power to live that new life. You believe that when you die and your body is laid in the ground, your soul will be immediately and gloriously in the presence of God in heaven. You believe that Jesus Christ will come again to judge the living and the dead and to vindicate those who have trusted Him. You believe that endless bliss and perfect satisfaction of human life, body and soul awaits at the resurrection those who have trusted Jesus Christ. You can't see any of that. You can't produce it or prove it in a laboratory. No one ever comes back from the other world to tell us how things are there except for Charles Wyatt. If those of you who didn't know Charles Wyatt, you'll get an opportunity to meet him one day. Charlie went to heaven. He died and went to heaven, came back, told us all about it. But for the most part, no one ever comes back from the other world to tell us how things are there. The evidence of our eyes, that's about all we have. We can't see sins forgiven. We have to believe it. We can't see our soul in heaven. We have to believe it. We have to believe. We have to believe it all on the strength of God's promise. And we've talked about God's promise this morning. Christ said He would return. It's been 2,000 years. I'm tired of waiting. We must believe that He will keep His promise. That's a lot to believe. That's a lot to believe. That's a semi-truck filled with lead weight to believe. And without God's help, we would never believe all of that. We couldn't. It's just not in us to believe those types of things. Some would say that faith comes down to us as a gift from God. I'm not certain about that. But I am certain that we must exercise the faith that we have, or it will begin to wither and die on the vine. It's the faith, brother. It's the faith. And that's why we must take it seriously. Because faith has to make a difference. Faith has to change the way we live. And it did for three men that we're going to look at this morning. We're going to look at Abel, Enoch, and Noah from the first few verses of Hebrews chapter 11. For them, for those men, it was all about the faith. And we learn from them at least one thing, that without faith you cannot be accepted by God. Read with me, if you will, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. God accepted accepted Abel's gift. The story of Cain and Abel is recorded in Genesis chapter 4. It's a tale that's so well known that many people who have never read the Bible can tell you that story. It's even entered into our language as a synonym for troublemaking. He's out there raising Cain. I'm not talking about the chicken joint that's up here on the street up here. Although it's good chicken. If you've never had that, that's good chicken. The phrase is appropriate because this story is dark and it's tragic from beginning to end. It's the first murder in human history. One brother kills another. He kills him in an outburst of rage and envy. Sibling rivalry is nothing new. It was present from the beginning. Cain farmed the soil, Abel raised livestock. And Cain brought an offering from his crops, while Abel brought a sacrifice of the best of his herd. And God accepted Abel's offering because it was brought in faith. There are a lot of mysteries about this story. There's much we don't know that we wish we knew. What's the age difference between Cain and Abel? That's always worried me. What were their growing up years like? Why did one choose to be a farmer and one choose to be a shepherd? How did they know to bring an offering to God? How did Cain know that Abel's sacrifice had been accepted and his had not? What exactly had Adam taught his sons about the proper way to approach God? I suspect that Adam had explained that God required a sacrifice. In the Greenville, South Carolina News, it's a newspaper out of Greenville, South Carolina, back in 2008, a story about a recent survey from the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life said that our nation is one of free-flowing spirituality. What that translates into, people are believing what they want and doing what they want and thinking what they want. They're making up their own religion. I dare say that many people in our churches have made up their own religion. It's reflected in the way we give. It's reflected in the way we tell the truth. It's reflected in the way we attend services. It's reflected in our integrity. And let me remind you, you can believe what you want, you can think what you want, you can act like you want, but there is only one way to God. And that is through faith in His Son, Jesus Christ. That's the only way. That's the only way. It's about the faith. And that faith must be in Jesus. For us, standing on this side of Calvary, it must be in Jesus. Whatever we may say about the two offerings of Cain and Abel, the real difference was in the heart. Abel had faith. Cain did not. Abel trusted God and offered the best that he had. Cain lacked faith and apparently just went through the motions. In Genesis chapter 4, verse 4 says that God looked with favor on Abel and his offering. He accepted his offering because of his faith. And the order of that is crucial because he accepted Abel first and then he accepted the offering. He accepted Abel because Abel had the faith to make that offering. He believed in God. And God always looks to the heart first and foremost. When he looked at Abel's heart, he found faith there. And it was that faith that he rewarded. As we read further, you'll see that without faith you cannot please God. Picture of someone standing in Redwood National Park. They're standing up looking at the sequoias as they continue to grow hundreds and hundreds of feet high. It's supposed to be an imagery of our faith growing and becoming strong like the redwood. Without faith you cannot please God. Read with me verses 5 and 6. By faith Enoch was taken from this life, so he did not experience death. He cannot be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. If the story of Cain and Abel seems short, the story of Enoch is minuscule by comparison, just 4 short verses back in Genesis chapter 5, verses 21 through 24. We have his entire life history right there. It says he was 65 years old, he'd lived for himself. But when Methuselah, his son, was born, he began to walk with God. And for 300 years he walked with God until he, as the Bible puts it, he was no more. Because God took him away. If the story of Abel is about our quest for acceptance, then the story of Enoch is the story of our journey. All of us are on a journey going somewhere. All of us are on a journey going somewhere. We're looking for something. We're looking for meaning. We're looking for purpose. We're looking for identity. We're looking for fulfillment. We're looking for satisfaction. And many people spend a lifetime engaged in a literal journey from one place to the next. One job to the next. One relationship to the next. Seeking something that just seems just out of reach. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says that God has put eternity inside every human heart. That is, God has placed in us a hunger to know who we are and where we fit into the universe. And all of our striving after career goals and worldly success, financial independence, and even our jumping from one relationship to another, those things are but symptoms of our deeper need to find our place in the universe. Does everybody know what a vacuum cleaner does? Vacuum cleaner creates a vortex and sucks in dirt. God created our heart to be a vortex to suck in something. And we spend a lifetime seeking what to fill that heart with. A lot of us fill it with junk food, the junk food of life. We fill it with whistles and bells. We fill it with temporary happiness. We fill it with relationship after relationship, seeking, longing, because that vacuum in our heart is seeking something to finally fill it. It's no wonder we're so unhappy, because we keep putting the wrong things in there. We keep seeking the wrong things. We keep believing the wrong things. Augustine said, "O Lord, you have made us for yourself. Our hearts are restless until they find rest in you." Rest is our topic next week. Our hearts are restless until they find rest in you. How true that is. Enoch's journey led him to God, and when he found God, he walked with him. He began walking with God after the birth of his son Methuselah. Perhaps he was like many men who don't get serious until they look into the face of their firstborn or their newborn son or daughter. And suddenly they realize the weight of responsibility. Perhaps that's what happened to Enoch. But in any case, it says at that moment, from that moment forward, he walked with God. And one day Enoch and God had walked so far that God said, "Well, why don't you just come home with me?" That's what we were always told in some of our Bible classes. "Why don't you just come on to my house? It's closer." And Enoch walked beyond space and time into eternity. He was not, because God took him off the earth and allowed him to enter heaven without experiencing death. He's one of two people in the Bible who didn't experience death. Elijah is the other. And Enoch's story teaches us that death for the believer is not a traumatic event. Though on earth it often seems traumatic. We've experienced that a lot here the last few months. But for the believer, for those who have put their faith in Jesus Christ, for those who have put their faith in God, death is simply a transition from this life to the next. John Stott said this: "Death is a trivial episode to the believer. It's a doorway through which we enter into the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ." Without faith, you cannot please God. Without faith, you cannot stand against the world. When we get to verse 7, it says, "Finally we have the story of Noah here in Genesis chapter 6 through 9. All of us know about the great flood, the massive ark, and the gathering of the animals. And we know how Noah saved his family while the world around him perished. But here we see another side of the life of faith. Let's read verses 6 and 7. Let's read verse 6 again. "And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith." We've been skirting around this issue the whole time. We believe in something that we do not see. We trust concretely in someone who we have not seen. That is our faith. But look what the Hebrew writer starts off this chapter with. Faith is the confidence in what we hope for and the assurance about what we do not see. Faith is believing that there is a God. He says here, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command. It goes all the way back to the very first verse of the Bible. We believe, we put our faith that God created the heavens and the earth. That God created man. That God created the animals. That God created every living thing on our planet. That God created everything in the cosmos. We believe in the unseen. We see the invisible attributes of God in the things that we do see. When we look out here at nature and we see the trees and the birds and the flowers, and we see the animals, and we see water, and we see the mountains, and we see the sky, and we see all these things, and we see each other. We see the invisible attributes of how powerful God is in those things. But we don't see God face to face. Abel pictures a quest for acceptance. Enoch pictures a journey to find God. Noah pictures the power of courage. The power of courage to say, I believe in something I cannot see. I believe in something I cannot touch. I believe in something I cannot smell. I believe in God. By faith, he preached for 120 years. Man, y'all think I'll go long. Y'all want to sit with me for another, 110 years now or so?
Yes.
Not today.
Not today. For 120 years he preached the truth and called society around him to repentance. And when the flood finally came, only eight people were saved. By faith he preached when no one would listen. By faith he built when people ridiculed. By faith he continued year after year after year for 120 years. By faith he believed in God regarding things he had not seen. To my understanding, it had never rained. And he says it's going to rain and it's going to flood. What are those things, God? Well, I'll show you in about 120 years. You got to hold on. You got to believe that what I say is going to come true. Here's a message for the men of the congregation. Fathers, I want you to listen up. Sons, brothers, I want you to pay attention. Husbands, I want you to observe this carefully. Single men, I want you to take notice. All the men and the boys, heed this word. Noah was a righteous man who had great faith in God. His faith saved his entire family. But note this, not one word is ever said about the faith of Noah's wife, or Shem, or Ham, or Japheth, or their wives. But they must have had some faith. And you'd want to know how I know this? Because when Noah got in the ark, Mrs. Noah was right there with him. When Mr. and Mrs. Noah got in the ark, his sons were right there with him. When his sons got in the ark, their wives were right there with him. Noah, his faith was strong enough to save his family. I don't know how much faith they had, but they had enough to follow Noah. They had enough to follow the head of the family because Noah had enough to inspire all of them to follow his example. That's the power of a godly leader. And that's what God has called each and every man in here to be. That kind of leader. Women, please don't be offended because he's called you to be leaders as well. God holds you accountable, men, to set the pace for your entire family. And if you live out your faith every day, it's natural and normal to expect your family to follow in your footsteps. We had that in our story this morning in Judges chapter 11 and 12 with Jeff. I'm about to lose my thought here. What was his name again? Jephthah. And his daughter. if you live out your faith every day, it's normal and natural to expect your family to follow in your footsteps. And for all of us, men and women alike, take heart from Noah's example. You can be godly in a very ungodly world. Let's stop complaining about how bad it is out there. Our complaining about it is not going to change it one bit. Our complaining really only adds to what's going on out there. But you know, as bad as things are today, they were worse in Noah's time. And you know how I know that? Because there were only 8. Because there were only 8 that were saved. I look around the room, I count a little bit more than 8 up in here. Amen. Thank you, brother. We have a lot more spiritual advantages than Noah did. We see the Christ. He didn't. He saw and was told by God to do something, and he believed God, and he did it. So, what do we have when we stand back and look at these 3 men who lived before the flood? That's us taking the leap of faith, by the way. I have no idea where that guy's jumping to. It's death, maybe. They trusted God. These aren't New Testament characters that we're talking about. These are men who existed centuries, millennia ago. And they are saved by the very same thing that we are. Their faith. Abel found the righteousness that comes by faith because he trusted God. Enoch walked with God and went straight to heaven because he trusted God. Noah had the courage to stand against an unbelieving world because he trusted God. From Abel to Enoch to Noah, what joins these men together? They trusted God. They did what they did by faith. And God honored them because of their faith. I don't need to try to convince you of anything, because without faith, you're not going to believe it anyway. But the true faith, faith that rests on God, faith that rests on His Word, believes all that He has said, true faith sees the unseen and says, yes, it's true. It's the faith, brother. It's all about the faith. Faith taken seriously makes a difference in our life and changes the way we live. And if you don't believe that, let me tell you a story as we finish up here this morning. This week sometime I want you to get an opportunity to go visit Scott and Janet Willis at scottandjanetwillis.com. I did not put that on your sheet. I'll share that with you a little bit later. Scott, S-C-O-T-T-A-N-D, Janet, J-A-N-E-T, Willis, scottandjanetwillis.com. November of 1994, Scott and Janet Willis, along with 6 of their children, were traveling in their minivan from their home on the south side of Chicago to Milwaukee on Interstate 94. The minivan ran over a large chunk of metal that had broken off the back of a semi-truck, and it punctured the van's gas tank and set off an explosion that ripped a hole through the back seat floor. Scott and Janet escaped with burns, but they couldn't save their children. Ben survived for just a few hours at the hospital. He passed in the night. Ben was 13. Joe was 11. Sam was 9. Hank was 6. Elizabeth was 3. And Peter was 6 weeks old. Seen through the eyes of a public that gasped at the enormity of their tragedy, Scott and Janet Willis faced unendurable grief. And today, Their grief is still wrenching. It's still unremitting. But they continue on by faith. Scott still preaches. He still serves. They had 3 older children who were not in the van who survived. Scott and Janet have 32 grandchildren today. And on the day that he met the media to discuss what had happened, I will give praise to my God in heaven in all circumstances. It's the faith, brother. It's the faith. When it's taken seriously, it makes a difference. It changes the way we live. And so I'm going to leave you with 2 questions, and we're going to listen to a song. The 2 questions I have for you. Do you have that faith? And if you do, are you living that faith? We're going to invite those who may need to respond this morning to an invitation as we stand and as we sing along with our video. Stand in Faith by Danny Gokey. Joseph, you'll hit that. Let's be standing as we sing, please.